Over the last two nights, we began the discussion about hijab. And we said that the topic of hijab is one of the most controversial topics of Islam, and there's lots of confusion and misconceptions about it. And that's why we stated that it is necessary to explain and discuss this topic from an Islamic point of view so that we are able to clear many of these misconceptions and biases that are held against the concept of hijab. And for the last two nights, number one, we proved that the hijab is ordained clearly by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran. And there is no room to doubt that hijab is not wajib. And that we prove that the hijab is not a part of culture, but hijab is ordained by Allah in the Quran. And number two, we proved that we said that Islam did not introduce hijab, but rather hijab existed before Islam. It is one of the teachings of Christianity and one of the teachings of Judaism. And today, inshallah, we shall speak about and go over the third or the fourth point that we raised in the beginning of the lectures. That we said that in most non-Muslim countries, and when you come to the non-Muslims and when you come to the West, you find that there is a very negative view of the hijab. And many people, many non-Muslims and Westerners, they object to the notion of hijab. And what you find is that in this current modern day, there is rarely a city in which you will not find a muhajjaba, a woman that is wearing the hijab across the world, and especially in the West. In the major cities of the West, it is no longer rare to see a woman that is wearing the hijab. Start from all the way from Australia to New Zealand to America, from Los Angeles to Vancouver in Canada, to Chicago, to New York and Miami and Toronto and Halifax and London and Paris and Rome and Berlin. And across all the European countries and the Western world, the concept of hijab is very clear to them in that they see muhajjabas all the time. It's not rare to see a muhajjaba. And to many of these non-Muslims, when they go out in the streets and they see a woman that is wearing the hijab, it scares them. Why? Because to them, the hijab, this headscarf that they see, represents all that the modern woman fought to break against. They see that the hijab, all our endeavors and all our attempts, whatever the modern woman tried to break from and destroy, they see that this is represented in the hijab. And that's why they will tell you the hijab represents what? Represents the oppression of Islam towards women. And that's why they will tell you Islam is a misogynistic religion. It's anti-woman. It deems women inferior to men. And the greatest proof they use against us is the hijab. Because they see, look, the hijab is oppression. Women have to cover up because they're inferior. And this is a symbol and sign of women's subservience and subjection to men. And this shows that women are nothing but prized possessions of men. And thus you find they attack Islam and they attack the notion of hijab. And if you remember a few years ago, the president of France then was Nicolas Sarkozy. He went out in the public and he condemned hijab. And he said that the hijab, and especially the full hijab, the burqa or the veil that covers the face, this is not welcomed in France because, according to him, this goes against the dignity, as he said, and the liberty of women. So if a woman wears this burqa, if she wears this niqab, if she wears the hijab, if she covers her face and body, she is humiliating herself. And this is a form of, as he said, subservience and debasement of women. And thus you find this sentiment is predominant in many of the Western countries. That they have a very, very evil look towards hijab. Hijab is evil, it's oppressive to women. And that's why you find that the hijab is attacked in every way possible. For example, politically. The hijab has been banned in numerous countries. For example, France. In France in 2004, they came out and legislated a law that says a woman is not allowed to wear the niqab in public. So if a woman covers her face with this piece of cloth, this is now all of a sudden a crime. And she will be what? She will be considered as a criminal, and there will be a penalty to pay. She'll have to pay a fine. And you find that shortly after, another European country followed, and that was Belgium. They also banned the niqab in public. And you see, France didn't stop there. France went further by banning not just the niqab, even the hijab, the headscarf, was banned in all public schools, public universities, and government institutions. So if there was a girl that wanted to go to public schools in France, or public universities, or wants to work for the government, if there's a public institution, meaning it's funded by the government, any agency or institution that is funded by the government, you're not allowed to wear the hijab in that institution. And you find that what's even worse, you see, France is a non-Muslim country. It's a non-Muslim secular country. What's even worse is the Muslim countries that place bans on hijab. And this is what's upsetting and disturbing. France is a secular nation. It's a non-Muslim country. What's upsetting and disturbing is when a Muslim country does that. And that's why you find there are two Muslim countries that placed a ban on the hijab. The hijab, the headscarf. One is Tunisia, and the other is Turkey. And that's why you find, if you read the news, over the last 30 years, from time to time, the cops, the police, they would launch crackdowns on the people. They would go on the streets and they would take off the hijabs of these Muslims. And the police are Muslim, but they would take off the hijabs of these women. It's illegal. And likewise, just like France and Turkey and in Tunisia, for many years, a girl could not wear a hijab if she wanted to go to school, public university, or work for the government. So if you want to be a politician, work for the government, be in the parliament, be in any form of government, any involvement of government, you have to take off the hijab. Do you see how? Do you see the animosity that they had against the hijab? And you find only recently, the past few years, in Turkey and Tunisia, these laws were a little loosened. But what you find is what? Politically, the hijab is attacked. Socially, the hijab is attacked in the West. You find that many Muslim women that wear the hijab in the West are discriminated against. And that you find, for example, you'll find tens of cases where Muslim girls wearing the hijab would go and they would apply for a job, and they would be denied the right to work for that company just because she was wearing the hijab. She's qualified. She has all the necessary prerequisites and she's perfectly qualified. The only problem is what? Is that headscarf on your head. So they were denied the right to work for companies because they wore the hijab. And just recently, 7 or 8 years ago, before I get to that, 7 or 8 years ago, there was a Muslim girl by the name of Samantha Elof or Elof or something like that. Samantha Elof. And you find this Muslim girl, this Muslim young woman, she went to a famous American apparel company that sell clothes by the name of Abercrombie. I'm sure you've heard of it, and maybe you have some of the stories here. She went and she applied for a job in Abercrombie. And the person that interviewed her, he has to see if she's qualified. Check, 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 everything was good. She was perfect. But at the end, he looks at her, he sees she's wearing the headscarf. So he tells her, I'm sorry, because you're wearing the headscarf, you're denied. What does she do? This is obviously religious discrimination. This is not allowed in America. So she goes and she files a lawsuit against that company and she wins. But then a judge, he overturns it and he says, no, the company had the right to do that because the company has a certain looks that they want to preserve and your hijab is against their looks. So what did she do? She finally took it up to the Supreme Court. And a few weeks ago, if you remember, it was all over the news. The Supreme Court finally took the side of the hijabi girl, and they decided that it's unconstitutional for a company to deny any girl the hijab, the job, just because she's wearing the hijab. This is religious discrimination, and that's why they said she could work for the company. This is one incident. Another incident of discrimination against women that wear the hijab is in Canada. A few years ago in Montreal, many of you remember, there was an 11-year-old girl by the name of Asmahan Mansour. She was a soccer player. She played with a team. And she wore the hijab and she played soccer while wearing the hijab. And maybe she was the only one on her team that wore the hijab. The first match she was allowed to play, no problems. The second match, no problems. The third match, the referee, who subhanallah, you see the problem I say sometimes Muslims are worse than non-Muslims. The referee, who was a Muslim ironically, he comes to this young girl and he tells her, you can't wear the hijab and play soccer. Why? Because this violates the regulations and the laws of soccer, because it's not safe, you might choke. You might choke. And thus she was, what? She was disqualified. She was not allowed to play in the third soccer match. And this created uproar in the Muslim community. This is religious discrimination. And what you find is interesting, the other teammates who were non-Muslim, they stood with her. They backed her, and they said, if she is not allowed to play, we will not play, and that's why they forfeited. So this is another incident of religious discrimination against a woman, a Muslim woman that is wearing hijab. And like I said, there are many, many other tens of cases. Go on the internet and read about it. Tens of cases of women that applied for jobs, they were denied just because they are wearing the hijab. So you find social discrimination exists in many of these Western countries against a woman that is wearing the hijab. And that's why for a Muslim woman to wear the hijab in the West is not easy. It's not easy. It's a challenge. It's difficult with all these evil sentiments. And she is looked down upon. And she will be denied many of her rights because of the hijab. Of course it's a challenge, but obviously the ajr and the reward will be much more. And now the question that comes here is why? Why all these evil sentiments against the hijab? Now, you find that yes, a portion of the people in the West, the non-Muslims, it's because they are ignorant of the philosophy of the hijab. And I'll get to this at the end of the lecture. But before that, you find that many of these non-Muslims and Westerners, when they attack the hijab and they say it's evil and they say it's oppression, you find that the true motive behind many of those accusations is because they have a grudge against Islam. They don't have a problem with the hijab. They have a problem with the woman that is wearing the hijab. They have a problem with the beliefs and the religion of the woman that is wearing the hijab. And you find they have a grudge against Islam. And one of the most conspicuous symbols of Islam in the world today is the hijab. The hijab has become the identity of Muslims. So if you want to attack Islam, the best way is to attack it through hijab, through the headscarf, because it's a very, very easy target. There's women all over the world and in the West that wear the hijab. So if I have a grudge and animosity and against Islam, the best way is to attack Islam by attacking the hijab. Now you might say I'm getting emotional, and no, this is not the true case. I'm not getting emotional, brothers and sisters. This is true, that for many of these accusations, there are political motives behind it. There are evil motives behind it, and they have no problem with the hijab. They don't see the hijab oppressive, but the true problem is with Islam. They want to attack Islam and destroy Islam, so they do it through hijab. This is not emotional talk, and I will give you proof to show that. And I'll be honest with you, I'll be frank with you, that this is a big problem that exists. The bias that many non-Muslims have against Islam, they take it out against the muhajjaba girls. So I'll bring you 3 pieces of proof and evidence that shows you that what I'm saying is true. That most of the reasons, most of the motives behind the people that say hijab is oppressive, hijab is bad, hijab is evil, hijab is this, hijab is that, is that these people, the true motive is to destroy Islam. Their problem is with Islam. Their problem isn't with the hijab. And that's why I always say, brothers and sisters, with the Wahhabis, the same thing applies. You see, the Wahhabis, when they kill the followers of Ahlul Bayt, why? They tell you because the Shia are mushrikeen. They worship the graves. They worship human beings, and that's why we kill them. And that's why I always say that this is nonsense. This isn't true. The Wahhabis don't have a problem with doing ziyarah of the graves. The Wahhabis don't have a problem with worshipping. Even if we worship the graves, they have no problem with worshipping the graves. They have no problem with worshipping idols. They have no problem with any of that. Do you know what their problem is? Their problem is with that person that is laying in the grave. Their problem is with your imams. He doesn't want you to do ziyarah of your imams. He doesn't care if you worship an idol, worship whoever you want. Just don't go near the imams. So his problem is not with doing ziyarah of the graves, it's more of a problem with the person in the grave. He wants to bring down Ahlul Bayt. He wants to bring down Ali ibn Abi Talib, Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein. So what does he say? You guys worship. It's not that. Or else, if that was the true case, how come you see never a Wahhabi, they never attack the other Muslims, non-Shia Muslims that do ziyarah of the graves? Go to Iraq, you see Abu Hanifa has a shrine, and the Sunnis, they go and they do ziyarah. Another alim that they have, Abd al-Qadir al-Jilani, he has a shrine. They go and they do ziyarah. Go to, for example, certain countries. In a certain country, I don't know which country it is exactly, but Bukhari, the famous Sunni scholar Bukhari, he has a huge shrine, and the Sunnis, they worship. Did you ever hear in your life a Wahhabi attacking them or saying this is shirk or saying this is haram? Did you hear a Wahhabi ever trying to kill an idol worshipper in China, in Japan, in Thailand? Why is it only the Shia of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam? So their problem isn't with idol worshipping. The problem isn't with doing ziyarah. Their problem is with Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. They hate us, they kill us because we love Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. And these are all excuses that they use. Shia worship the graves. Shia worship Ahlul Bayt. Shia do ziyarah. These are all excuses. If they truly had a problem, why don't they try to destroy the shrine of, for example, Bukhari? Or they never even attack it. They know there's a shrine, they never attack it. So this proves that what? They're playing games. And they are not true and sincere about their motives. So the same thing applies with the hijab. They don't have a problem with the hijab. They have a problem with the person that's wearing the hijab, with Muslims, with Islam. And that's why they attack Islam through the hijab. And like I said, 3 proofs. Proof number 1, that they don't have a problem with the hijab, it's more, they have a problem with Islam, is that these accusations that you hear, that hijab is evil, hijab is oppression towards women, how come is it that we only hear these accusations, we only began hearing them 20, 30, or maximum 50, 60 years ago? Before the 20th century, you never heard a trace of any atheist, of any Christian, of any Jew, of any non-Muslim that ever attacked the concept of hijab. This is all new. And yeah, you might say, maybe because they loved Islam. No, go read history, you will find that hundreds of books have been written by Christians and non-Muslims attacking Islam and trying to disprove Islam. You will never find any of those Christians ever said, attacked Islam through hijab. They never ever said this. Go back to early Christian books, 500 years ago, 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Every small detail of Islam, they would attack it. This is bad, this is evil, this is wrong. But they never attacked hijab. Why? All of a sudden, 30 years ago, all of a sudden hijab became evil? For 1,000 years it was good. No one attacked it. 30, 40, 50 years ago, all of a sudden it becomes degrading to women, and it becomes oppression, and it becomes evil. What happens? So this shows you that if they truly had a problem with hijab, this would reflect in their early teachings. And like I said yesterday, if they truly were against hijab, they would attack the Bible. They would attack the what? The Talmud. They would attack Christians and Jews as well, because they also have the hijab in their books. And I said the only difference between Islam, Muslims, and Christians and Jews is that Muslims stayed adherent to their hijab, most of them. The Christians and Jews, they don't follow their teachings. Or else in their teachings, I proved yesterday, there is the concept of hijab. So if you believe hijab is evil, why don't you attack Christianity? Why don't you attack Jesus? Why don't you attack Moses? Why is it only Islam? So this shows you that they have no problem with the hijab itself. But their problem is with what? Is Islam. It's not with hijab. That's number 1. Number 2, if a non-Muslim, especially a Christian, tells you that the hijab is evil, there's a very, very strong and beautiful answer you can answer them with. What do you tell them? You ask them 3 questions. Question number 1, you tell them, have you heard of something called nuns? They will tell you yes. What are nuns? They will tell you nuns are certain women, devout, practicing Christian women that are called nuns. Question number 2, ask them, have you noticed what nuns wear? They will tell you yes, they cover their entire body except the face and the hands, which is basically what? The hijab. So that's question number 2. Question number 3, have you ever heard anyone attack nuns for wearing hijab? Have you in your life? I have never. Have you ever heard anyone say that nuns are degrading themselves by wearing the hijab? Have you ever heard of anyone that accuses the hijab of the nuns as oppression? And this is a sign of inferiority? Never. In fact, Christians, when it comes to nuns, they have such a positive look of their hijab. Their hijab is a sign of modesty, chastity. It's a sign of their devotion to Jesus, to Mary. And it's a sign that they are practicing and good people. And that's why they wear nuns. They're very holy in their eyes. But when they see this poor Muslim woman wearing the hijab, she's evil, she's backwards, she's this. Do you see the double standard? Do you see the double standard? Do you see the hypocrisy? That's why I tell you, their problem is not with hijab. It's with the woman that's wearing the hijab. It's with Islam and Muslims. If they had a problem with hijab, they would attack nuns. And they would say, nuns, this is depressing, this is oppression, this is degrading, this is this and this is that. But you will never hear that. It's always directed, the attacks are always directed towards Islam and towards Muslims. Just like the Wahhabis. They have no problem with worshipping the graves, with doing ziyarah. We don't worship the graves, but even if we worship, they have no problem with that. Worship the idols, they don't care. Their problem is with the persons that you're visiting. And that's why, brothers and sisters, try this. I challenge any one of you, take a ziyarah book, go to the city of Medina, stand right in front of the grave of Umar and Abu Bakr and do ziyarah. Wallahi, no one will lay his finger on you. You see those shayateen around the grave of Rasulullah, as soon as you say, Assalamu alaikum ya Rasulullah, shut, get away, they kick you out. Try it with a loud voice, show them that I am doing ziyarah of Umar and Abu Bakr. No one will. And I saw this in front of my eyes one day. I was in the Umrah, and I was in front of the grave of Rasulullah. Every couple of seconds, he kicks me out. I have to go and stand somewhere else. That person that works there. All of a sudden, I see a man with a very long beard and a very short dishdasha. So obviously, he's Wahhabi. And he is reading ziyarah. So what is this guy reading? Who is he visiting? So I look. It's in Arabic. I see. It says, Wallahi, I saw this with my eyes. It says, Assalamu alaykuma ya khalifatay Rasulullah. Assalamu alaykuma ya waziray Rasulullah. I salute you, salam unto you, the two khalifas of Rasulullah, the two vicegerents of Rasulullah. So I spoke to him, he didn't speak Arabic. He was probably from India or Pakistan. So I asked him, who are you speaking to? So he flipped the page. I see, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Bakr as-Siddiq. Assalamu alayka ya Umar al-Faruq. Wallahi, he did his ziyarah. No one touched him. No one told him anything. They have a problem with ziyarah, huh? No, wallahi, they don't. They have a problem with the person that you're doing ziyarah to. Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib. Rasulullah. But do ziyarah to one of the companions, to one of the Sahaba, that's perfectly fine. So you see, subhanallah, here in the West, the same thing applies. That when it comes to hijab, they have no problem with hijab. And that's why a nun is fine. A nun is exempted. A nun is excluded. She can wear the hijab and she will be looked as a holy person. But when a Muslim woman does it, she's looked down upon. So this is number 2. And number 3, why I say there are evil motives behind these accusations, is that people like Sarkozy and the likes of Sarkozy, that when they say that the hijab is degrading to women, you ask them, you ask a person like Sarkozy and the likes of Sarkozy, when a woman decides to go out in the public and cover herself because she believes this is modest, you say this is degrading. But when a woman goes out fully naked in the street, this is not degrading. It's not. If a woman wants to go out fully naked in the street, is this degrading? Is this banned in France? You see, France is filled with nude beaches. Let a woman go out in any street in France wearing a bikini. Will anyone touch her? Will anyone tell her this is degrading? You're letting all men look at you as a sexual object? Will anyone tell that to a woman in France? No, why? Because to them, being naked is what? Is freedom, is liberty. To them, freedom equals being naked, that's all. And wearing clothes, this is what? This is oppression, this is backwards, this is all the other words that they accuse Islam of. So do you see the double standard here again? Do you see how ironic that if a woman wants to cover her body, this is what? This is oppression, this is degrading, humiliating. But if she wants to come out naked, that's fine. At least, if we want to be fair, we have to ask all women. we have to ask all women to be moderate. Don't wear the full hijab and don't come out naked. Be modest. Wear some clothes. But no, this is degrading. If a woman wants to wear clothes, it's degrading. But if she wants to take off clothes, it's not degrading. And go out in the public in front of the eyes of men, it's perfectly fine. That's perfect. Do you see the double standard? So you see, the problem is what? The problem is with Islam. The problem isn't with the fact that I wear the hijab. I'm wearing the hijab and thus it's bad. Their problem is not with that, brothers and sisters. And that's why, if any non-Muslim one day tells you that the hijab is backwards, then there is a very beautiful answer that you can give them. If a non-Muslim comes to you that the hijab is backwards, this is from 1,000 years ago. Now the world has become what? Modern, and the world is moving towards fashion and whatever. This is backwards. So how do you answer? One of the most beautiful answers, brothers and sisters, was given by a Yemeni woman that wears hijab. In 2011, many of you know this, a Yemeni woman, she won the Nobel Peace Prize. And her name was Tawakkul Karman, and she wore the hijab. So when they presented her this award, journalists came to interview her. And some of the journalists, they criticized her. They said, you know what, such a person of high caliber, you're so intelligent, you're so educated, you won the Peace Prize. This doesn't match with your hijab, sorry. When I imagine Nobel Peace Prize, I imagine what? Bikini. I imagine, seeing skin, flesh. This is how they see it. So how does that, it's not appropriate for you. It doesn't match. It's not proportional. Hijab is for the backwards Muslims, the uneducated Muslims. She gave the most beautiful answer. And I'll read you her answer. Do you know what she said? She said, man, listen carefully, it's such a beautiful answer. She said, man in the early times was almost naked. Go back to 3,000 years ago. People in the Stone Ages, they were almost naked. They just covered the private parts. And that's why, likewise, now if you go to villages in Africa that are uncivilized, they're almost naked. So she's trying to tell them that when men and human beings were uncivilized, they used to be naked. Okay? Man in the early times was almost naked. And as his intellect evolved, he started wearing clothes. As time evolved, people began wearing more and more clothes. You don't see people wearing like the Stone Ages anymore. That's why till now, when you go to the uncivilized villages in Africa and some other countries, they don't wear clothes. Once they become civilized and come to the city, they wear clothes. So is it wearing clothes that's backwards or taking off clothes that's backwards? Which one? Taking off clothes, not wearing clothes. And then she says, what I am today and what I'm wearing today represents the highest level of thought and civilization that man has achieved, and it's not regressive. Don't tell me I'm going backwards. The more human beings progress, the more they advance, the more clothes they put on. So don't tell me that because I'm wearing the hijab, this is regressive and going backwards. You're the one that's coming out with the bikini. This is the regressive. You're going back to the Stone Ages. You're becoming like the uncivilized tribes that exist. And then she said, it's the removal of clothes, again, that is regressive back to ancient times. Do you see what a beautiful answer? So if anyone tells you that the hijab is backwards, tell them no. It's when I don't wear hijab, this is backwards. But you see, the double standard exists. Go out naked, it's fine. But wear clothes, this is bad, and we will prevent you from wearing clothes. We will prevent you from covering up. We will prevent you from becoming modest. You see, if you ask French people and the French government, why did you ban the hijab? They will tell you, we're a secular nation. We separate between church and state. And the idea of a secular nation, if you look for the definition of what's a secular nation, is that they separate church and state. And that it's a two-way system. Number one, the church or the religious institution does not interfere into politics and government. Keep religion out of politics. So don't bring me the Quran and Sharia and the Bible and you try to make laws based on that. So what? The first aspect of a secular society and government is that keep religion out of government. But there's a second aspect too. Keep government out of religion as well. Government doesn't have the right to interfere in religion. So if there is a government that keeps on interfering in religion, it tells people, pray like this, follow this belief, you can't do this, you can. This is not a secular society. This is an anti-religious society. This is not a democratic society. This is a form of dictatorship. We will be following in the footsteps of whom? Of Saddam. Saddam, he used to force people to what? To not practice. He used to prevent certain people from practicing their religions. Now if France wants to place a ban on the hijab, then they're following the footsteps of Saddam. Saddam used to ban people from doing ziyarah, doing ziyarah of Arba'in. Does France want to be like Saddam? Isn't France a democratic nation? Aren't they a nation that gives freedom and liberty? So what you find is that secularism is what? Don't involve religion in government and don't involve government in religion. So what gives the right to the French government to tell people how they practice their religion? If a woman sees that this is a form of modesty, she wants to wear the niqab or hijab, why does the French government involve itself? This is dictatorship. I ask you, brothers and sisters, go to Iran. In Iran, the hijab is what? The hijab is forced by the government. And obviously the West doesn't like this. They consider this backwards. And this is what? Against freedom. They consider this as a form of dictatorship. Brothers and sisters, France isn't too much better than Iran. Because what's the difference? Either I force a woman to wear hijab or I force her to not wear hijab. The point is I'm forcing them to wear or not wear. This is dictatorship. How is France considered free, a free country? When they tell you, you can't wear the hijab. Exactly like Iran, same thing. So any accusation you have towards Iran, that they force women to wear hijab, you have to also direct this accusation towards France. If a woman wants to degrade herself, it's none of your business. She wants to do that. So this shows you that these people, have double standards. And what these countries like France and Belgium and Turkey, what they don't get, brothers and sisters, that when they put a ban on hijab and on niqab, this won't solve the problem. This is what they don't understand. Because number one, anytime if you want someone to not practice a certain part of his religion, force will never be an answer. If you force people and you prohibit them and you use power to prevent them from practicing their religion, this will just make people resist more. It will make people stubborn and they will resist more. And that's why you find, like I said in Saddam Hussein, for 30 years, 40 years, he completely banned ziyarah. You go Arba'in, you see not too much people. Why? Because it was banned. Was Saddam successful in banning it? As soon as he was toppled, millions of people began going ziyarah. Millions of people go and they do azab and they cry for Imam Hussein. Because force is never a solution. I mean, it's subhanAllah, we have to tell this to France. France, who's the leader of so-called the free world and the French Revolution and democracy. You have to teach them such things. That force will not help. If I have a problem with someone's belief, I have to academically bring it down, intellectually, not by force. This is a cowardly way of trying to prevent people from practicing the religion. That's number one. And number two, when you ask them, why do you do this? Why do you place a ban on the hijab and on the niqab? They tell you, because we want to liberate women. So this poor woman that's wearing this abaya, this hijab, she's in a cage. I have come to liberate her. What they don't understand is if you place a ban, you're not going to liberate her. You're just going to make her life worse. Because now, not only is she in a cage, as they see it, now she's afraid of the authorities too. Now, that's why you see many women in France, after that niqab ban, they did not leave the niqab. Maybe 5% they left the niqab, 10%. The majority, do you know what happened? They end up staying home. So is this a form of liberation? Or is this you're making their lives as hell and worse? And that's why in Turkey, one of the reasons why they lifted the ban recently of the hijab in public schools is because they said this wasn't a solution. All that this was causing was that girls weren't getting education. When I ban the hijab on girls in school, don't think they're going to take off the hijabs and come. 10% or 15%. The majority, they'll just stay home and not receive an education. Is this a solution? I prevent them from education because there's no hijab? Is this a solution? This is ridiculous. So that's why they saw that for this reason, it's futile. It's a waste of time. We shouldn't ban the hijab. We're just depriving those poor girls, those poor backward girls, of education. And that's why they lifted the ban. France, till now, they don't understand this. That when you put a ban, you're just going to deprive people. And that's why read about the Muslims in France. I don't know, wallahi, subhanallah, we are in ni'mah in these countries, in Canada and America, that they are much less, they have much less discrimination against the hijab. I don't know how they live in France. And read about how the Muslims live in France. Most of the Muslims, they can't take their children to public schools because they'll have to take off the hijab. So what do they end up doing? They end up even having to do either homeschooling, which is very difficult, or they send them to Catholic schools, Christian schools, because it's private. They can wear the hijab there, or they just stay home and don't receive an education. Is this a solution? You see, if they were truly sincere about the problem with hijab, they wouldn't go about and preventing it and banning it politically. Because this just makes everything much worse. And that's why, if you had read the history of Iran during the reign of the first Pahlavi Shah, not the second one, the first, Rida Shah, he likewise, for a few years, he brought up a ban on hijab. In Iran, all across Iran, women were not allowed to wear hijab for a couple of years. Did this solve the problem? No. What happened in the end? People stayed in their houses. Women stayed in their houses. So you're making the lives of these women who are already in a cage, as you see it, you're making it even worse. At least she can come out in the public, but in a cage. Now, you will limit her domain to her house. And that's why I heard one alim say, that an old alim, he says, my mother, during the reign, she lived in Iran, during the reign of this Shah, for 3 years, she never placed her feet outside the house. Because as soon as she would go out, the police would take off her hijab. Is this making their lives better or more miserable? You be the judge. So that's why we see that those countries, or those people that accuse Islam of being what? Of being oppressive to women, these people aren't sincere. There are political motives. They want to bring down Islam. There are sinister motives. And subhanallah, brothers and sisters, what's very disturbing is that a few months ago, I read on the news, it's very disturbing. Wallahi, I couldn't sleep that night. Do you know what happened in France a couple of months ago? A young girl, a young Muslim girl, she's in a public school. Did they ban her from wearing the hijab? No, to hell with the hijab. Not hijab. She already took off the hijab. She's in a class one day in a public school in France. She's kicked out of the class. Why? Do you know why? I don't know if you read it in the news. Not because she's wearing the hijab. Forget about the hijab. Because, subhanallah, because her skirt was too long. Subhanallah. I'm speechless, brothers and sisters. I don't know what to say. Are we speaking about Saddam, Afghanistan, Taliban, or are we speaking about France? France, the leader of the free world. She's kicked out of the class because her skirt is too long. Where are the morals? What happened? What's going on in this world, brothers and sisters? Where is this world leading us to? And that's why I always say to those people that say, for example, you heard it yesterday or the day before yesterday, what happened in America? In America, it was a very important day, a day of history. It was a day of celebration. They say a very important day. It was a success for freedom and the rights of human beings. What happened? Gay marriage was legalized in all the 50 states. And that's why I say this should be a day of mourning. A day of mourning. A day in which we stomped on our akhlaq, on our manners and morals, and we buried them. We're animals. Yesterday, America declared that we're no longer humans, we're animals. And they're celebrating this. And that's why I tell those people that say, what? We're free human beings. Why do we object to this? If a person wants to marry, a man wants to marry a man, or a woman. They're free human beings. You know what I tell them? And we were having a discussion about this last night. I tell them that what if in 50 years, a young man comes in front of the public and says, I want to marry my mother. How do you answer this person? If a person comes and says, I want to marry my sister. If a father says, I want to marry my daughter. How do you answer? Freedom. If they're both okay with it, and they both consent to it. How do you answer them? Tell them akhlaq. Akhlaq was buried 50 years ago when gay marriage was legalized. What do you tell them? You tell them akhlaq, there is no akhlaq. You tell them deen, religion, there is no religion. Secular society. So if you open the door and you go down this road, even incest, wallahi, wait, 50, 100 years from now, you'll see incest will be okay. And the day will come that the Supreme Court will say, if a person wants to marry their mother, or their father, or their child, or their brother, or their uncle, this is fine. Because freedom, at the end of the day, I'm a free human being and I can do what I want. And if they're both okay with it, how do you reply? Do you see where this world is leading? And that's why in one hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, he spoke about this 1500 years ago. In one hadith, it's narrated that he told the Sahaba one day, كيف بكم إذا فسق شبابكم وفسدت نساؤكم وأنتم لا تأمرون بالمعروف ولا تنهون عن المنكر. A day will come, he tells the Sahaba, that your youth will be corrupt and your women will be evil and corrupt, and you men, you will not enjoy the good. You won't encourage the good, nor will you discourage the good. You say, it's none of my business. Subhanallah, look at the Sahaba, how innocent they are. They say, أَوَيَكُونُ ذَلِكَ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. Will this actually happen one day? They're so innocent. Let them come and see what's going on today. Rasulullah tells them, yes, وَشَرٌ مِّن ذَلِكَ. Wait, worse than that. كَيْفَ بِكُمْ إِذَا أَمَرْتُمْ بِالْمُنْكَرِ وَنَهَيْتُمْ عَنِ الْمَعْرُوفِ. A day will come, not only you'll say it's none of my business, I won't encourage the good, I won't discourage the bad, the evil. A day will come in which you will encourage people to do immoral things. You'll encourage people to do bad, and you'll discourage them from doing good. Just like in France. A girl that wants to be modest and wear a long skirt, she's discouraged and kicked out of class. They tell him, أَوَيَكُونُ ذَلِكَ. No way, are you joking, Ya Rasulullah? Will this happen? He tells them, wait, وَشَرٌ مِّن ذَلِكَ كَيْفَ بِكُمْ. And this is the final level of the human beings turning into animals and completely losing their morals, and the destruction of the morals of the human beings. كَيْفَ بِكُمْ إِذَا رَأَيْتُمُ الْمُنْكَرَ مَعْرُوفًا وَالْمَعْرُوفَ مُنْكَرًا. A day will come in which you will see good things as bad, and bad things are good. Your moral system will be completely upside down, your standards. If a person wears hijab, she's backwards. They see this as bad. But if she goes out naked in the public, she's modern, she's good. If a person wants to be modest, this is bad. If a person wants to be immodest, this is good. Where are the morals? Where are the manners? Everything is the other way around. Everything is upside down. What's going on, brothers and sisters? Nastajiru billah. We must seek refuge in Allah. What's going to happen in 100 years, in 200 years, in 500 years? If there are no morals, there is no religion, human beings, I won't say will become animals, they will become far worse than animals. Because even animals, they have their limits. But some human beings have absolutely no limits. So that's why, brothers and sisters, I say that these countries, many of them, when they accuse Islam, the hijab is backwards, there are evil motives behind this. They know it's not evil. They know completely this is not evil. They want to bring down Islam. Their true battle is with Islam, it's not with the hijab. This is just an excuse that they use. And subhanallah, do you know what completely puzzles these non-Muslims that attack the hijab? Do you know what puzzles them? They don't understand. Do you know that in America, there are every year a couple of thousands of non-Muslims that become Muslims. They convert to Islam. Do you know that statistics state that up to 75% of those converts are women? Subhanallah. If this is such a bad religion, and it mistreats women, and it degrades women, and it oppresses women, and it forces... Why are all these women in America, not in Bangladesh, not in Afghanistan, not in Iraq, not in Saudi, but in America, they're Americans, Christians, Jews. Why are they converting to Islam? Why do you join a religion that's so evil and you're a woman? This is what puzzles them. Their propaganda obviously is not working, because most of the converts are women. Their propaganda has failed. So you see, brothers and sisters, many people, they attack hijab because what? Because of their evil plans. But however, there are still some non-Muslims, we give them the benefit of the doubt, They attack the hijab or they object because they're ignorant, because they haven't understood the philosophy of the hijab. It's because you see, some non-Muslims, they attack the hijab because they think the hijab is enforced, is forced upon women. They think that women all over the Muslim world, they don't want to wear the hijab, but it's either the father or the husband or the brother that forces them to wear the hijab, and that's why they want to liberate them. And this is a misconception. Yes, I won't deny it. There are in some Muslim countries, there are some families that force the hijab. But the majority of Muslim women, they do it based on their own will, just like a nun does it. Just like a nun, she does it based on her free will. The majority of Muslim women, they wear the hijab based on their free will. So it's because they think it's forced, they think it's oppression. So that's why we have to show them and tell them and explain to them. It's wajib. We can't tell them it's a choice. It's wajib by Allah, but no one's forcing them. I do it as a woman because I want to please my Lord, because my Lord wants it. Not because my father or my husband is telling me. Because my Lord and my Creator wants it. That's number one. And number two, the second reason why they have such a negative look and perception and evil sentiment of the hijab is because they are looking at the hijab through the Christian and Jewish perspective of hijab. You see, brothers and sisters, when you go to the Christian hijab that we spoke about yesterday, you will see that yes, the Christian hijab is a sign of woman's subjection to men. So in Christianity and Judaism, the hijab that they believe in, the philosophy behind it is so what? So that it's a sign that this woman is inferior to the man. This woman is dominated by the man. So since they look at hijab from the Christian and Jewish perspective, that hijab means what? Means that this woman is inferior. Hijab means this woman what? Is dominated by a man. They say it's evil. This is in Christianity. In Islam, in Judaism, in Islam, the hijab has nothing to do with the husband. Has nothing to do, it's Allah's decision. Yes, there's a philosophy behind it that I'll speak about tomorrow, inshallah. But the reason why Allah says hijab is wajib, you will not find any ayah or hadith, is because this is a sign of inferiority of women. This is a sign of subjection of women to men. But in Christianity and Judaism, you will find that. And I'll read you one passage from the Bible to prove that. You see in the Bible, in the same chapter that I spoke about yesterday in the New Testament, the first letter of Corinthians, chapter 11, verse 3, this is what it says. It says, but Jesus or whoever God is speaking, but I want you to realize that the head of every man is Christ. Every man, male, his leader, his head is Christ. And the head of Christ is God. And then he says, and the head of every woman is man. So do you see the hierarchy? First woman, their head is man. And then the head of man is Christ and God. So do you see the hierarchy? This is clearly mentioned in the Bible. And then this is more important. It says, for this reason, it speaks about covering the hijab, covering the head. For this reason, a woman should have a sign of authority and subjection on her head. So remember yesterday I said in the same chapter, Jesus or Paul, he says, women have to what? Cover their head, or else they have dishonored their head. And then he says, for this reason, a woman should have a sign of authority and subjection on her head. So why, we ask Paul, why do women have to wear the hijab? Because the women are inferior to men. And there has to be a sign of subjection and authority. So that when you see this human being is wearing the hijab, oh, that means they have someone that's superior to them. This is in the Bible. Clearly mentioned. Woman, then man, then Christ. Women have to wear the hijab because to show that they are subdued to men. To show their submission to men. It's clearly mentioned. You will not find anything in the Quran that says that woman, the hijab is a sign of submission to men. And the Bible is there. Do you ever hear anyone attack the Bible? Say the Bible is anti-woman, Christianity is a misogynistic religion? Never. See the hypocrisy. So what we have to do, brothers and sisters, we have to show, and I will end very soon, we have to show these Christians, these Jews, these non-Muslims, that you have a bias against hijab because you're looking at hijab through the Christian hijab, through the Jewish hijab. Our hijab has nothing to do with the man, has nothing to do with the husband. And it's not a sign that this woman is subdued to her husband, or she is submitting to her husband. No, this is Christianity, this is not Islam. We have to clear this misconception. If we clear it, you will understand. Islam says wear the hijab for other reasons. What are those reasons? Tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, inshallah, I should speak about that. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept our amal, to bless us all. And I ask you, brothers and sisters, please to recite the Fatiha on the shuhada that died and were killed and massacred in the masjid yesterday, the followers of Ahl Bayt in the country of Kuwait. Pray for them, brothers and sisters. Keep them in your dua. Pray for all the Shia of Ahlul Bayt, that Allah protects them and keeps all harm against them. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين. الفاتحة مع الصلوات.